Welcome everyone. First time for our new format. We'll have a studio from now on every time when it's possible. As you see, I have to fix it. This side, you'll see Charis. Charis, as you know, is the invisible pink unicorn, the sparkly unicorn, and we were lucky enough that the sparkles at least turn up on camera, so Charis is at least just a little bit visible. So today we have a very special guest, Dr. Richard Carrier. Welcome, Dr. Carrier. Yeah. You have been on our list for quite a while, so we're very proud to have you here. I have to say, Charis did fix that. I won't ask how she did it, but great job, Charis. Okay. Aha. How do you take how do you take pictures of an invisible unicorn? That's what I want to know. Okay, special aperture. Okay, so I I will now keep my mouth shut about this particular topic. So because I've known Karis for a while. So okay. So first of all, am I correct that you might be the most hated biblical scholar in the U.S. because
we compete. Bart Ehrman and I are both compete for the top slot of most hated biblical scholar.
okay, just had an issue. Seems we don't have sound. We'll
My
have
sound?
to. Yeah, I think
But you
I turned. I
have your
turned.
sound.
Yeah, I turned it up a little.
For me or
It's
him?
no, it's
Yeah,
fixed.
who's
It's fixed. It's
Oh,
fixed.
okay.
It's fixed. Okay.
It's fixed. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
So
I mean, there's the plus to them not having heard what I just said.
yeah, that's a very big plus that they didn't hear what you
Oh,
said. What you
did
just
we
said.
just have like a whole one-sided conversation with not only an invisible unicorn but a silent unicorn?
A silent unicorn as well. Yeah. I
Very
I
good.
I know a guy close to Karis who might be interested in how I did that. I might be messaging him. Okay, so I'll restate my question. As I said, I think you might be the most hated um, biblical scholar in the U.S. because every time when I get on Twitter and the name Carrier comes on, it's
Yes.
it's
Okay. Yes.
it's never a good
Dawkins.
yeah.
Dawkins.
No, it's biblical scholar. You're right. Whenever some
Okay,
Bible
biblical
thing comes
scholar.
up, yeah, whenever some Bible things come up, well, Carrier says, and then like, oh, and like it causes riots.
Yeah.
Yeah. How dare you cite Carrier, someone with a PhD in peer-reviewed publications?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Speaking of, what does it feel like to be one of the sources that a person should be citing in an argument? Because everybody says, cite your source. Well, you're standing right in front of them. You are a source.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like my goal in life, is to be that useful, so that once I'm dead, I'll still be a citable source for lots of things. Honestly, I kind of learned this from my dissertation advisor at Columbia University, William Harris. But every book he wrote, basically his mission was, I want to make this book required reading and required citing on that subject for decades to come. So like, even if it gets refuted or obsolete, you always have to go back to that book and cite it and discuss it. And so his books are like massively thoroughly argued for every single. He did like ancient literacy, Roman imperialism, and dreams and experience. He's done a lot of anger. He did the whole thing on ancient beliefs about anger and rage. And so I picked that up from him. So I try to like make my books like so thorough and essential that even if parts of them are wrong, they still have to be cited and discussed. And so, yeah, I aim to do that. I mean, it's what I do in lieu of having children, basically.
okay, but do you get a lot of animosity while doing talks? Because for me, it's a little bit difficult to understand. I'm from Holland, and so. Things are completely different here. Religion doesn't have a foothold at all. So the things that I experience in the U.S. are way off.
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially for a major industrial, especially for a superpower, a major industrialized Western country, it is an aberration, I think, in that respect. But you mean like when I'm actually giving public talks, do I get
yes.
Do I get grief? No, not usually. Occasionally I get some weirdo or crank who wants to push some bizarre theory like all literature was invented in 1000 AD or something like that. And so there's a lot of kooks on a lot of different angles. I don't get a lot of fundamentalists heckling me or anything like that. The closest thing that ever happened to that was I had a mass protest against a talk I gave in Manteca, California once. And the speaker before me, they did a protest where they surrounded the community center where he was speaking. And that created a lot of grief. So even a lot of local churches wrote letters to the local newspaper saying, we don't like this because this is starting to look very Nazi-esque and scary. And we actually support free speech, and it's a community center, and they should get to do what they want. Like, you're making us look bad. So there's actually pushback from a lot of religious figures in the city and county about that. And so when I came to protest, instead what they did, instead of surrounding the building, they rented the neighboring park and had a big giant Bible festival for kids and stuff as a kind of counter protest, like a counter speech, like come to our thing instead of this evil atheist thing. And that was the worst that I've ever gotten in terms of actual protests or anything like that of me personally at an event.
Okay, so and what I'd really like to know is what was behind your choice to take this route to become a Bible scholar and one pretty much dedicated on finding stuff that others apparently couldn't.
Yeah, my story is unusual, I think, compared to most folks. And I tell my story in detail in Sense and Goodness Without God, which is my first book that I published. But in outline, basically, I was not raised in a fundamentalist household. I was raised in a super liberal household, super liberal Bible school or Sunday school kind of thing, like where they would teach Greek myths and Bible myths next to each other and not even say that there was any difference. It was the moral of the story, not the literal truth that mattered. It was very, very, it would be shocking to a fundamentalist. Like, how dare they teach Christianity that way? But no, I was actually super liberal and super open. And I was never required to believe anything. So I was never really a believer in Christianity. And my parents let me just choose my own faith. and ended up being converted by a personal religious experience to Taoism. So I actually became a devout, meditative Taoist, philosophical Taoist for many years. Even when I went into the military, that was my announced faith on my military record. So so that's completely different background for folks. So when I lost faith in that and realized that my religious experiences that were convincing me were actually totally explicable scientifically, and the teachings are actually flawed and therefore not perfect, and so I realized, wow, this is just some human man-made wisdom from ancient times, and it's got advantages and disadvantages just like anything else. And at that moment, this happened in the Coast Guard when I was doing my year at sea on a ship, and I realized like this had given me a lot of grounding, and like it gave me a worldview, like it gave me like a complete idea of like morality, epistemology, all this stuff, and made my life better and made me a better person and all of these things. So I was like, well, if that's false, like what do I replace it with? And so I started deciding that philosophy is now my religion, and I'm going to build a worldview based on science and facts and what I can do. And that eventually led to my book, Sense and Goodness Without God, many, many years later. Which is a complete worldview, mostly about what we should believe in as atheists, rather than focusing on what we don't believe in. And so that was one of my interest areas, and has been ever since. It's like it's basically my religion that I'm evangelizing for is personal philosophy, being a good philosopher, thinking about your life, your philosophy of life as a worldview, and thinking about how to make it evidence based and all of this. So getting that word out to folks was part of my mission from way back then. But when I went, once I got out of the military, I went to college and sampled a bunch of different majors, but eventually fell in love with history, which was really unexpected because I was a science major in high school and hated history in high school. And in college, I just went the other way. I still kept up with my science knowledge, but I fell in love with the way history was done in college. It was about cause and effect. Why did these things happen? And it was about methodology. How do we know these things happened? And those are way more interesting questions. Plus, in college, they can explore a whole bunch of issues that you're not allowed to talk about in high school because it will freak out parents or kids. So, so I got interested in that, and then especially fell in love with the Roman Empire unit in the Western Civ course. So I really like this culture. I want to study this culture more. This sounds awesome. And at the same time, I was getting more involved in the atheism movement and discovering fundamentalism and counter-apologetics and arguing with people online.
Oh, I could tell you some stories.
And I realized I could kill two birds with one stone if I go this route. If I do history of Roman Empire, I would do something that I'm passionate about and I would enjoy. Plus, I would have all the skills and stuff necessary to actually counterpunch Christian apologetics. Because a lot of time Christian preachers and stuff will say the Greek says this, or they'll talk about ancient history or the Bible in ways that amateurs and ordinary people often can't check because they don't have the skills of the languages and things like that. And we didn't really have a major biblical scholar in atheism at the time. I mean, eventually we got Hector Avalos, who's probably the leading biblical scholar who engages with the atheist community and gives us support with books and articles and things. But there wasn't anyone else really. And so I decided to go that route. And so that led to two tracks in my life. One is philosophy, modern philosophy of naturalism, philosophy of Christianity, counter-apologetics on that side. And then the other side is history, ancient history especially, but I've done some other things, Hitler studies and various other things in engaging history of science as well, when engaging Christian apologetics. And so I do both history side and philosophy side, and I blog about each separately. I teach classes in each separately. And so both of those are really just because no one else is doing it, and I love doing it, and it needs to be done. This stuff needs to be created so people can go and cite it, rely on it, learn from it, and so we can dispel a lot of the mythology and rhetoric that's going on.
Yeah, well, it baffles me that there aren't more people focusing on the historicity, because
it's a threat.
I know.
It's a third rail. No one wants to touch it, right? And so right now there are 8 of us, 8 fully qualified PhDs or professors, retired or sitting, or independent scholars. 8 of us who agree that it's doubtable, that we're historicity agnostics. We're agnostic about the historicity of Jesus. Hector Avalos being one of them, in fact. And there's 3 other scholars who've gone on record who have full qualifications, who've admitted that it's at least a plausible theory, even if they disagree with it. So interest in it is growing, but no one wants to write on it, at least unless you're like a young up-and-coming scholar. No one wants to write on it because it's just a lightning rod for all kinds of harassment and difficulties and pushback. And they know this because in biblical studies, they saw this happen to Thomas Thompson in the 1970s when he came out with his argument that Moses didn't exist. The entire industry tried to destroy his career, basically try to get him disinvited from conferences, try to get his papers nixed under peer review, try to prevent him from being hired, try to mess with him in various ways. And there's a lot of shame over this now, but people fear that happening again. So a lot of people just don't want to go there. Like they just want to I'm just not going to deal with this. I'll just stick with what I'm doing because that's too much of a hassle. I don't want to touch that. And so I think there is a lot of resistance to it. And I know there are scholars who actually are agnostics about historicity, but won't come out publicly for this very reason. Like it's just going to cause me too much grief, and I don't want to deal with it. And so what we need really is a change of the guard. We got to wait for attrition. We got to wait for old scholars to retire and die off, and new scholars to come in who aren't beholden to this old dogma and this system of oppression, and are actually willing to go there and challenge these things. So that might take, as it did with Thompson, it might take a decade or more for that to become the case.
May I put on my fundamentalist hat for a moment?
Yes.
To play.
Does it fit on your alicorn?
It's shrunk a bit in the wash, but I'll try to shove it on nonetheless. So to play devil's advocate, there are over 300 million residents of the U.S. I don't know how many of those are scholars in your field, but you say only 8 of you have this position. So what would you say to that argument? Because I mean, you know that number is going to be dismissed. There are only 8 of you in 300 million people.
Yeah, right. Well, 300 million is the wrong number, of course. The only people we want to know are people who are experts in. It's really only 2 opinions that matter, 2 facts that have to matter. You have to be an expert in the field, otherwise your judgment can't trump an expert in the field. You can be agnostic based on you see the debates. You can come to a decision by seeing the debates among scholars, but you are not a part of the scholarly consensus yet.
Right.
Until you're an expert. But also you have to actually review the arguments. So your opinion has to be informed. Like just being an expert does not make your opinion informed. And this is particularly the case when you have a challenge to the consensus that gets through peer review. So I've published a peer-reviewed challenge to the consensus, which the whole point of peer review is to say, okay, we need to re-examine the consensus, go back to this, look at this argument, see if this holds up, see if the consensus survives this challenge. What's happening instead is almost all scholars are ignoring it. They're not consulting the book. They're not checking the arguments. And even will just outright admit that they've refused to read the book, and will even make arguments against it that are completely wrong because they get completely wrong what's in the book, right? And so this is what's going on. There's a sort of dogmatic intent to defend this position rather than doing what scholars are supposed to do, which is go and check the peer-reviewed challenge to the consensus, see if it holds up. Let's debate this challenge to the consensus and see if the consensus changes. And that's what we would do if this was any other uncharged issue. If we were talking about the historicity of Hercules or the historicity of Homer, this would be a completely balanced issue, and we'd be debating it rather than everybody just stalwartly ignoring it or not refusing to even read the peer-reviewed challenge of the consensus. So when people cite the numbers of scholars, what we want to know is, are you talking about scholars who actually read the peer-reviewed challenge to the consensus and came to a decision? And is their decision based on what's actually in that book, or is it not? I mean, this is the question we have to ask going forward, and really need to pressure scholars to not have opinions about things they haven't read. So like you need to actually confront this book, and if you have an opinion about the conclusion of the book, show us that it's based on what's in the book and not based on something else. That's what we need, and that's what we need going forward from both sides. So you really can't cite the consensus at this point, because we have a challenge to the consensus that has met the proper standards of challenges to the consensus. So they have to actually go back and look at it and treat it fairly and honestly, and then come to a conclusion. And that's what we need to see happen. And people need to push for that rather than ignoring it.
Right. And thank you for, answering that, because, as a fundamentalist, it's one of those things that I would have come up with at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, another thing that I would like other people who have been in my position or are in my position right now, in my former position right now, think of all the other times when the consensus has been challenged. What did it take? How many people did it? I mean, it probably wasn't that many. Yeah.
Well, frankly, Thomas Thompson in 1970s published the first real challenge to the historicity of Moses, and it did take 10 or more years for an accumulating consensus. And now the consensus is that, Moses didn't exist, or at least we can't establish that he did. So So we see what happened in a previous consensus challenge, both the irrational resistance to the challenge and the eventual acceptance of it. And what it took for one to happen to the other. Like finally people had to actually examine the evidence, treat it fairly, and come to a conclusion. And that's what we need to see.
Okay. So when you said 8 people are currently working on this, that's not an awful lot. So
right. Yeah.
And so are you in touch a lot, or do you have different fields where you do your research? How does it work? Because you're such
we're
a
not
small
coordinated.
Yeah. Fringe group.
Yeah, we're not coordinated, and this is just a reported conclusion. So, like Hector Avalos, as far as I know, Avalos is not researching this any further. He's just published that he's examined the record and the arguments and stuff, and has concluded that actually there's a fair reason to be doubtful about the historicity of Jesus. He says agnosticism is the position we should take. And then we have, on the opposite end, we have like Raphael Lataster, who just got his PhD in religious studies, he's actively researching and publishing on this, and he's actually examining the debate. He's actually publishing books examining how it's being argued pro and con, and so he's the most engaged in the debate right now, and for that reason, like we are more in touch, I think, than Avalos and I on this issue. I communicate with Avalos on other topics, but so it's mostly that's the picture of what's going on now. Now, I only published my peer-reviewed challenge to the historicity of Jesus in 2014, and that was the first time in history that any challenge to the historicity of Jesus was published through peer review. It had been an amateur kind of crank thesis for a long time before that. And what I did is I eliminated all the amateur bad arguments and flaws and stuff and swept that all away. And what was left, I realized, was still a strong enough argument to publish. And so that's what I did. So 2014, it's only 2018 now. It's only been a few years. So if you look at the comparable situation in the 70s with Thomas Thompson, we're on the same timeline. Like he probably would have had maybe 8 or 10 scholars siding with him as well around the same time. And that will just expand over time. Fundamentalists will always reject it. They'll always say that there was always a Moses, totally Exodus is historical, and so on. But the mainstream consensus is no, the Exodus story is myth. There probably wasn't a Moses, probably wasn't an Abraham, and so on. And so that's another factor, is you got to look at the difference between fundamentalist scholars who are contractually and religiously obligated to deny this is true, and then actual scholars who are free of that obligation and therefore they have free will. They can actually decide on their own whether this is true or not. And that's the part of the scholarly community we really want to look at. And so we're doing. So we'll see in like 10 years where we are in terms of how many scholars at least think it's plausible.
I will note that an average fundamentalist who has listened to Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron will
that's the worst. Okay, yeah.
will latch on to your use of the word probably.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing is I outright say in my book on the historicity of Jesus that my conclusion is that the probability that Jesus existed is no better than 1 in 3, which is actually highly uncertain. It's like 1 in 3 is a respectable chance of existing. It just means he's slightly probably doesn't exist, but there's a chance that he existed. Like I give an actual decent shot that there was a historical Jesus. It's slightly below 50%, and that's what freaks people out, is that how dare you suggest it's below 50%? It's not even as if I'm coming out saying, absolutely, it's guaranteed, we've proven that Jesus didn't exist. Not even the conclusion of my book. And so there is this kind of hyperbolic outrage at just the mere suggestion that it could be below 50% or even 50%. And so but they'll try to characterize that as, how dare you claim that we're certain that Jesus didn't exist? And that's not the case.
Well, if anything, saying that there is a chance that he did exist is even more of a threat, because now you're not posing your argument as just, atheist, anti-theist rhetoric. Now
Right.
You're saying, based on what we actually have, there is this chance that he did, there is a larger chance that he didn't. And knowing that you're not taking just, what they would think of as an anti-theist stance,
Right.
That is very threatening. Because, their claim, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Yeah.
Free. What if the truth is actually saying that he didn't exist? That is a very threatening idea.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah.
I mean, think of what Paul said. I mean, if everything that we believe right now isn't true, you're, basically one of the most pathetic people it's ever.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. No, literally. And you're describing the actual trigger for the cognitive dissonance that prevents people from accepting this reality.
It would be much easier for them to dismiss you if you simply took the stereotypical anti-theist response that, oh, Jesus, was not a historical figure, 0% chance that he even existed.
Right,
it would be much easier for them to dismiss that. But
and I
discourage
people from framing it that way. Like, don't say 0%. Of course, it's not 0%, right? So, like don't try beating Christians over the head with the Jesus didn't exist thing. It's like, you are far more certain that Jesus didn't rise from the dead than that he didn't exist. So just focus on the resurrection thing. If you're going to argue with Christians, really, it's only someone who's not a Christian that now has a mind open enough that they can actually examine the evidence for the historicity of Jesus and consider it fairly. You have to get out of Christianity before you're even going to be psychologically able to deal with that.
I would have to respectfully disagree with that.
Oh, really?
Partially, because on my journey out, I was not yet deconverted before I started considering that.
Oh, I see. Oh, interesting.
I'm not. I know that I'm not, an absolutely unique specimen.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to say, if it happened with me, it might happen with others.
Yeah, well, I'm curious about that. I'm curious about that, though. So when you say you started to doubt, like, you weren't like convinced he didn't exist, but you started to realize that there were valid doubts, and that's what raised the issue.
Right. I was not. I was.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, right?
Yeah, and it was, I was involved in the Thinking Atheist board at the time, as a Christian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So, because, on my journey out, I figured, I've heard all of these evil tales of atheists through my, through my life as a fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And there were things in my life that had happened that had brought me out of fundamentalism, but not out of Christianity. And I thought, while I'm considering paganism, while I'm thinking of becoming a Wiccan, why not ask these atheists what they say about themselves? And they brought up some, to me at the time, legitimate arguments against many different things, including the historicity of Jesus as we know him, not necessarily as a person, but the Jesus that we know of in the Bible.
Yeah, that's certainly, we can say, almost certainly didn't exist. Like, even mainstream scholars and experts in this field will agree that the gospel Jesus didn't exist. That's a fiction built on and layered upon some much simpler, less famous guy, right? So yes, it's very easy to challenge the gospel Jesus, because the Gospels hugely exaggerate the fame of this man. Like, they say he was famous all across the entire province of Syria. This is actually in the Gospel of Matthew, and it's like, that's insane. Like, if he was that famous, we would have tons more references to him. So yeah, that's, and then you go to, like, all the massively public events that the Gospels record that no one else noticed and things like that. So yeah, that is definitely defeating the historicity of the gospel Jesus is way easier than arguing for historicity altogether. But fundamentalists will often conflate those things. They'll say, like, well, no historian thinks that Jesus didn't exist, therefore the gospel Jesus existed. It's like, no. Most of the experts, the consensus you're citing actually agrees that the gospel Jesus didn't exist. They're arguing that a different Jesus existed, some other one that we have to reconstruct through digging through the layers of myth and falsehood.
And just a disclaimer, I say this with the understanding that any fundamentalist who's listening to me right now will say, if I was having those thoughts, I was not a Christian at that time.
I love that. The circular argument is like, anyone who disagrees with this proposition does so because they're of the devil. Or whatever, right? Like there's no, you can't ever have been, you can't be rational and disagree with this conclusion. Therefore, if you disagree with this conclusion, you must be irrational. It'd be the same kind of argument. That's like, there's no way to prove that, to show that it was a disciplined and valid disagreement, because you're just immediately labeling all disagreement as, oh, you were never a real believer.
Well, even church science on occasion will say that logic or science is the enemy of faith.
Yeah.
And, that's fairly telling.
I have a photograph from the Creation Museum, which is not too far from where I live, and that I use in lectures sometimes. But it shows, it basically has this whole series of plaques where they're arguing against, where it's reason versus God's word. And the whole series of plaques is arguing that reason is bad, questioning is bad, it's of the devil, and trusting in God's word, faith, that's the better thing. There's some very amusing ways they try to graphically represent this. But yeah, no, they're very, very explicit about that sometimes. Sometimes they know that's a really embarrassing, unpopular thing to say, so that they'll avoid saying that. And then some Christians, even fundamentalists, sometimes will actually denounce that and say, like, no, we shouldn't be discrediting science and logic. We should really show that science and logic support Christianity, and then you have a whole different breed of fundamentalism. And so you do have to be aware of these different types of people when you're engaging them. Ray Comfort is, a completely different category of person than Craig Evans, for example, who I debated in Georgia a while back on the historicity of Jesus, in fact.
Well, and when it comes to Ken Ham, he pretty much thinks that you should support science unless it goes against what the Bible says. Then you shouldn't support science. I mean, he doesn't even have a consistency in whether or not to support science, and it's a total mess. And the other thing you touched on, which I still find hilarious, is that Christians among themselves can't even figure out who's a real Christian and who's not.
Right.
And because so I talked to Kent Hovind, for instance. Kent Hovind will still say that Ken Ham is a nice guy, but he's wrong on several counts. So he's not a real Christian. He needs to become a Baptist, and he reads the wrong Bible. And to me, that's
right.
That's incredible. That's something I'll never get.
Oh, it happens all the time. One of my areas of expertise, weirdly, that's a whole other story, is on Hitler's Table Talk, which is this German manuscript that came out of Hitler's bunker through various channels after the war. And Christians often quote the English translation of this, showing Hitler being an atheist. And those quotes are actually either bogusly translated or taken out of context. And I've written a peer-reviewed paper on this for German Studies Review, which people can find in my book Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ, which has this in there. But they'll often, I just recently wrote an article about an update on this. There's another scholar in Sweden who's actually doing a whole Dan Brown thing on this, where he's like going investigating, looking in archives, talking to ancestors and family members of these people connected to these documents and stuff. And so I did an update article on that, and then I did a debate about it on Hitler's religion on London radio, on Justin Brierley's show for Christian radio in England. And there was some people were trying to respond that when I was putting these arguments out, like, no, Hitler was actually clearly an advocate of positive Christianity. Publicly, he was a Catholic. Privately, he mocked Catholicism and supported the doctrines of positive Christianity, which is this sect distinctive of the Nazis. The Nazis developed this really weird sect of Christianity. But he was definitely Christian. He thought Christ was an authority. He thought he was going to go to heaven. He thought he was doing God's will, and all of this stuff. So he believed in creation. He was a creationist. So Hitler was definitely a believer and definitely a Christian. But one can argue not a Trinitarian, right? Doesn't accept. Maybe he's not a Trinitarian, and so people say, well, he doesn't accept the Trinity. He's not a real Christian. I'm like, what about Jehovah's Witnesses? Aren't they Christians? Like, no, they're not. Would say no. They're not Christians. Yes, exactly. And I'm like, I have to disagree. There's been lots of Christian sects that were not Trinitarian.
Well, but they would go back
Paul himself, who was not a Trinitarian. But yeah, so now they're saying Paul wasn't a Trinitarian. Your own freaking inspired author of the New Testament, part of the New Testament, wasn't a Trinitarian. Oh, now we don't have a Christian Bible anymore. So this always amuses me when they want to try and exclude obvious Christians who are advocating for Christ and belief in Christ as not Christians. I find that hilarious. Just because some particular group of Christian sects decided on their own that we're going to exclude those people from the appellation. But it's hilarious.
Well, they'll fall back on the verses that suggest, there will be many who say unto me, Lord, Lord, and they're not actually Christians. They'll be claiming to be
Sure.
Christians and claiming the name of Christ, but they won't be actually believing heretical doctrines. And to be fair to some of them, which I don't even know if this is being fair, it might just be unnecessarily lenient. They'll kind of say, well, you'll be judged according to your knowledge. So maybe they'll say, well, some of them are just ignorant of the Trinity. I mean, what about those who lived before the time of the Trinity having been discovered? Wow, I can't talk. English is hard, guys.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know if that made any sense, but
we have a Christian in the side chat, and he's convinced that we will find the evidence for Jesus, and there's nothing to worry yet, because
meaning when we die? Is that what he means? They might be. I don't know if they're a guy or a girl.
Well, that is one popular take. Anytime an atheist dies, one of the common jokes is, "Oh, he's not an atheist now."
Oh, I haven't heard that one. That's pretty hilarious. I mean, technically, since you could do like predicate logic, that he doesn't exist anymore, therefore he's not an atheist, right? So it's true either way.
Well, I think what they mean is you're now bowing before God, and
you're in the presence of Allah, who instructs you that Jesus didn't exist after all. No, I mean
Zeus.
Presence of Osiris or the goddess Isis. You're in the presence of the goddess Isis, and she says, "What's the password?" Oh crap, I don't know the password. Because Christianity has been filling people's minds with the wrong information, so now they don't know how to get into heaven because they haven't been given the password.
I'm going to lob another dumb fundamentalism question at you.
Right, excellent.
Putting on my fundy hat. Okay, why we believe your expertise over that of others? What makes your information something that we should really take seriously?
Yeah, experts should always be able to back any conclusion they come to. If they say, like, this is what I say based on my expertise, they should be able to show facts that back it. Now, some of those facts might be inaccessible to average people. Like you say, well, the Greek says this. And it's like, well, you have to figure out how do I confirm that that's what the Greek actually says. So you have to find ways of doing that. But that's the answer. Like that's the whole point of having those footnotes and having detailed references to scholarship and things like that. Is like if you doubt any claim that I say based on my expertise, go look at the facts. Go check if the facts that I'm basing conclusion on actually exist and are actually as I claim they are, and does the conclusion actually logically follow from those facts? Well, that's how you independently vet that an expert is being honest with you. And to an extent, once you've vetted an expert, you can stop having to fact check everything they say. You start to trust them. And it can work the other way around. If you start checking an expert and finding them factually wrong, like reporting facts incorrectly multiple times or using bad logic, then you can start to exclude them from your trustworthy sources of information. And really, that's what people need to do who aren't experts, is vet your experts. See if you can catch them giving you false information, reasoning illogically. Or if they hold up, even the most alarming things they say hold up, then you have increasing reason to trust them and trust their expertise if they're being honest with you. And I think that's what experts or what non-experts need to do as often as possible, so they can figure out which experts they can trust and which ones not. And usually Christians don't do that. They don't actually vet the experts say what they want. They don't actually check if they're telling the truth or not. They just say, well, my experts say this, so I get to ignore you. It's like, well, actually fact check what those guys are saying. Is it actually accurately true? Are they misleading you? Does that conclusion not really logically follow from the facts that they present? And I think that's kind of usually the path out of Christianity, is when you start questioning the authorities you trusted and you start realizing that they've been lying to you, or that they've been manipulating you with fallacious reasoning or incorrect information or unsupportable information. That's what people need to know about, and that's a lot of what I do, is like expose that to people, to show that look, your own experts are getting these things wrong, and you need to ask, why is that? Why are they giving you false information or invalid information?
The average layman doesn't really know where to start. How does a person go from believing, having 100% utter faith in what the Bible says,
Hmm.
into, maybe they, I'm not, okay. I'm not trying to talk against anybody who hasn't had an education beyond high school, because honestly, education in this country is ridiculous. It's ridiculously expensive, and for some people, it's
Hmm.
you just can't access it. So how does a person without the education, without the experience for knowing how to fact check things, how where do they start?
Well, you can self-teach those skills, right? The thing that I've noticed, so I travel all across North America, U.S. and Canada, and hang out with folks of all social classes and educational backgrounds. And I find that when I'm hanging out with working class people, people who only have high school degrees, sometimes even not even that, um, a lot of them, and of course these are atheists, so there's sort of a selection bias here in terms of that tends to be people who get more educated or more knowledgeable end up being atheists. So, but anyone can do this. What they do, what I find is that they read. They just read a lot, and they ask questions about what they read. They don't just implicitly believe things. And I think really it's those two things. It's the questioning attitude, the assumption like, well, I'm not just going to assume that everything I'm being told is correct. How would I figure out whether this is correct or not? And they see that as a problem to solve. And that's one thing I think everybody learns how to do. Like in your work, in your life, it's like, well, I've got this problem. How do I solve this problem? Once you've set yourself on that mission, is like, how do I vet this? How do I check if this is true? That will send you on a quest that will teach you all kinds of things about how to check these things. You'll get better skills at doing it, and you'll get better at it over time. And then the more you read, the more knowledge you have, the more you start to realize there's conflicting information, the more you realize there's information that undermines stuff that you thought was the case before. Your understanding of reality gets more complex. And so people can do this without a college education. I've seen it many times. So it's doable. You just have to want to do it, and hopefully have the time, like at least some time in your life to be able to do it. Like now in our economy, a lot of people are just overworked to death, don't have any spare time to actually learn these things or study these things. And that, I think, is a big tragedy for the future of this country, at least the U.S. in any case. But apart from that, no, I think this is doable. It is that attitude of questioning and seeing it as a problem to solve. How do I vet these things? How do I, with my set of skills, my limited set of background knowledge, how do I get to this? And you can. There's lots of things you can do, things you can't do, but things you can do. And then just do it. Like, engage yourself, actually challenge yourself, read a lot of stuff, explore a lot of stuff, compare notes and all of that. That's how it's done. And I think every ex-Christian I've spoken to kind of describes that process that they went through themselves, even if they weren't consciously aware that that was what they were doing. That's kind of it, ultimately.
I think the thing that finally did what finally did it for me was, ironically, a Christian teaching. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Yes.
and we
this
also
has been pointed out.
we have a related question to all of this in the side chat. A friend of mine who's a regular on I think it's NGC Studios, Dr. Michael Jones, and he has stated that he won't talk to you because he thinks that you're not fluent in Hebrew and Greek. And what would you say to Dr. Michael Jones?
I have extensive experience in Greek. So this is funny. It came up in my debate with Mike Licona, the first debate I ever did, incidentally, which you can find, I think you can find online. I did 2 debates with Michael Licona, a major Christian apologist now. But the first debate, he brought up that as like, well, what qualifications do you have in Greek? And I knew he was going to ask the question, so I had a slide brought up that listed all my credentials in studying classics and Greek language and linguistics at Columbia University and UC Berkeley as well. So yes, I definitely have extensive knowledge of Greek, but I don't do Hebrew, that's for sure. So I rely on other experts for anything I talk about in respect to Hebrew. I rely on actual Hebrew experts if I say anything about the Hebrew. But yeah, no, Greek is definitely my thing.
Yeah, and so Charis is still planning a show on double standards, and we'll make that sometime. We're still gathering double standards. I'd say that's
that would be a great one. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
that's an awesome point for the double standards, because how many Christians would be fluent in Hebrew and Greek, and how many Christians would be able to check whether or not their King James Bible is as accurate as they think it is? Because
yeah, and anything like that, I as a philosopher, my first advice is get out of the abstract discussion and get to a particular. Should always bring things down to particulars. So, like, pick a specific instance where you think this is a problem. Like, say, like, well, Richard Carrier doesn't know Greek, and here's why this is a problem. Let's give it a specific example of his handling of the Greek that I have an issue with, and discuss that, and then see if it holds up, right? So, because abstractions, generalizations are built out of a series of particulars, and if you can't find a single particular that supports your abstraction or your generalization, well, then you know your generalization is unfounded. And so you have to be able to find particulars. If you can't even think of any, then that's another issue too that I find. That it's easy to like deconstruct people's arguments when you say, well, let's talk about a particular example and see where that goes. And usually it doesn't go anywhere that they want.
No, it usually doesn't. No, but yeah, as I said, they don't check their own book themselves. Most of them won't even read it. Now, I saw a couple of episodes where Dr. Jones was on. At least he put Tim Rugenkate in his place at one point, so he did have some credit with me. He did that in the best possible way, I think. And by bringing up Sci, what are your thoughts on presuppositional apologists? Because they would say
that's a pretty big subject, though, Peter.
Yeah.
Well, it's just a circular argument. But I'll say because there's also a dispute within Christian apologists between presuppositionalists and defenders of the argument from reason, which is different. So defenders of the argument from reason, like Victor Reppert, for example, disagree with presuppositionalists. They say presuppositionalists have it all wrong, that you can only make these arguments as an empirical argument, not a presuppositional argument. And the empirical argument, the argument from reason, is a much more interesting argument and leads to much more productive atheist philosophy, because the challenge Victor Reppert poses is that how, as an atheist, do you explain logic and reason? Like, what explains why logic is reliable? What explains why reason is reliable? What explains why your brain is capable of doing these things? And that's a valid question. I do think atheist worldviews should be able to answer that. That should be a question scientists should be answering. And in fact, they have. Like, we have tons of science, we have tons of knowledge about how these things are true and why they're true. But it's worth working out and understanding that, because you'll get a much more deeper understanding of the nature of the world, the nature of the human mind, the nature of human history, because, in fact, logic is a technology we invented. It's not something we were born with. We did not evolve to be logical creatures. And so that's all very useful. So I find that kind of Christian critique of atheism valuable, because it leads to like productive results. I mean, ultimately their argument fails, but only by the fact that we can actually come up with better explanations of why these things are true than they do. Presuppositionalists will just like reject the whole comparison of models concept, and therefore are rejecting the whole concept of how you should even tell the difference between a true theory and a false one. Like, they have no defensible method, essentially. They're just going to keep asserting a sort of proposition and never accept any evidence against that proposition, which is just irrational reasoning. Like, there's no way you can know you're false if you're going to reject any possible evidence that what you're saying is false. So presuppositionalism, I think, is mostly bullshit. I think most presuppositionalists are actually liars and schemers and manipulators. They're con men who are trying to game you. They're basically the ultimate troll, in a sense. They're always trolling you, rather than engaging in a sincere quest for understanding of the truth of how things work. And that's why I generally don't engage in presuppositionalists. I think they're profoundly dishonest con artists, essentially.
But you, of course, operate under the presupposition that God doesn't exist.
Which, of course, isn't true, right? Yeah, it's not a presupposition. It's a conclusion. and as is everything that you conclude about anything other than what experiences you're having at this present moment. But anything you go beyond that as to why you're having those experiences or what they mean as to what exists outside your mind, that's all conclusion, not presupposition. There are no presuppositions outside of that. Everything is conclusion.
Somebody should tell Greg Koukl this. Greg Koukl is the author of Tactics, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one.
No. What's that one? I don't think I have.
Greg Koukl is he's written a book called Tactics, and it's designed for Christians to debate with non-believers, specifically atheists.
Interesting.
Who and pretty much the how-to shift the burden of proof. So if we're called, if fundamentalists are called presuppositionalists, then the opposing presupposition is that God doesn't exist.
Right.
So now you have to defend a claim that you're making.
Which violates the law of excluded middle, right? It's a false dichotomy that one either presupposes X or presupposes not X. In fact, there's a middle position, which is presupposing neither. And so logical validity requires acknowledging the third position. But of course, that requires being honest, and hence the problem.
Okay.
This is a little bit off the topic, but at the same time slightly related. What would you think of people like Jason Lyle? Because he's, he has legit degrees.
Give me an example. I don't know the name. I don't recognize it.
He worked with Answers in Genesis. I don't think he works with them now, but he was, I believe, an astrophysicist.
Oh, okay. No, I've not read his work, so I actually have no comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah, he still works there.
He does?
Think,
okay.
Yeah, I think last week they sent out a video with him in it, so he still works there.
An astrophysicist who's a young Earth creationist. Is this what we're describing?
Yes, sir.
That is bizarre. I just have to say that's bizarre. It's unfathomable.
My personal deconversion experience had to do with a geologist, I think he was. I read this in so many I thinks, but I think in one of Richard Dawkins' books, he was a geologist who said, to put it in a nutshell, if it was proven that part of the Bible was not true, beyond the shadow of a doubt, if it was proven, I would still have to have faith in the Bible. And I've been raised to have too much of a respect for truth to take that seriously, and I had to reject everything.
Yeah, that's William Lane Craig makes that same argument, that his witness of the Holy Spirit contradicts all evidence. So if no matter how much evidence there is against anything that he says is true, he will reject that evidence because the Holy Spirit tells him that it's the other way around. So yeah, that's a dangerously fatal way to approach reality, because it means you're preventing any possibility of ever discovering that you're wrong. So that you'll never know when you are wrong. You'll never know if you're wrong about something, you'll never know it. And if you sit back and think, like, do I want to be in that position? Do I want to be in a position where I will be wrong about things and I will never find out? And I think there are probably some people who are really scared of things like their mortality and things like that. Will actually say, yeah, I don't want to know reality. But a lot of people will say, like, actually, no, I don't want to be in a position where I will never find out I'm wrong about something. If I'm wrong about something, I'd like to know that I'm wrong about something. You have to actually figure out, well, then how would you know? And then that leads to the whole cascade of logic and reason and critical thinking. But you were about to say.
For somebody like fundamentalism, I'm not sure if this applies also to the more moderate Christians, but somebody like a fundamentalist, just doubting is putting themselves almost in danger of hellfire. Mm-hmm. If you're doubting anything about God, you tread on the edge and precipice of heresy. And what do you do when it's revealed to you, gee, I wasn't a true believer all along? You're in danger of hellfire. It's an existential crisis for them. Yeah,
it's a don't go there, right? It's a control doctrine. So there's a lot of this. I wrote about this when Randall Rouser, a Christian apologist, wrote this book, Is the Atheist My Neighbor? And he wrote, it's a really good book, by the way, for Christian apologetics. It's a book that I think all atheist Christians should read. And read my review of it, because I have some issues with it, but mostly it's pretty good. And he argues that Christians have it all wrong. Like they shouldn't be demonizing atheists. They shouldn't be quoting the Bible verse that says only a fool would say there is no God. So he does that from like an actual Christian fundamentalist exegetical perspective, and says, no, this is actually biblically wrong. It's Christian. It's wrong on a faith basis and all this stuff. You should not be treating atheists this way or demonizing atheists, or saying that you should not say that atheists are only atheists because they want to sin, because they're in rebellion and all of that. These are all wrong. And so he says, like, no, atheists are your neighbor. You need to treat them like they've actually come to a sensible position, that they're not these sort of awful, evil people that your preachers from the pulpit are telling you they are. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. I mean, like I said, I have some issues with it, but the one crucial flaw in the book is that he's way too nice and honest. In reality, so what he says is one of the recommendations he has in there is like, you should invite atheists to interfaith discussions. You should engage with atheists more. You should be more welcoming to atheists in your churches and things like that. But the reason why that'll never happen, at least not with fundamentalist churches or conservative churches, is because the moment you do that, you're saying that it is respectable to be an atheist. And the moment you say it's respectable to be an atheist, now everybody in your congregation is going, oh, it's respectable to be an atheist? Well, maybe then I should go consider atheism. And they don't want that. They want to actually demonize atheism and make atheists sound awful and evil and rebellious and sinful and all of these things, and try to make them sound like awful people so that you won't doubt, because if you doubt, then you might think you're one of these awful people who doubts. And so there's a lot of these control doctrines that are used to manipulate people and keep them in the faith, rather than just being honest and saying, hey, yeah, actually, you should explore that. You should, and your faith should stand to reason. It should actually survive that test. Go explore it. Go talk to atheists. Treat atheists with respect and listen to what they have to say. Research these things. Ask all these questions. This is all great. Trust me, your faith will survive it. But in reality, that's not what happens. When you start asking too many questions, they say, you're asking too many questions. You need to stop now. Or they say something like, well, I think the hellfire argument, like you said, you're in danger of hellfire. Or there's always some sort of control doctrine that comes down that slams down against any critical inquiry. And that should make you deeply suspicious of your religion. If your religion has to be defended by these these arguments against critical inquiry, then your religion probably can't stand. And there's probably a reason for that. And that should scare you and concern you. And it takes a while, I think, for people to discover that and realize that, and move on from there.
I think a lot of this stems, just the gesture of accepting atheists into, a church, a Christian community. I think a lot of it has to do with the idea of loving your enemies. And it's a bit of a virtue signal. I'm over here loving my enemy, the atheist.
Yeah. So, they don't ever actually follow. Very rarely do they follow through on that actual.
There's a difference between love.
Can I just notice that in the side chat, a Christian is now unblocking an atheist, which was, I thought, a little bit hilarious.
That's great.
Because that went on during this particular talk. I have to say that in what we do, Mind the Gap is actually that was Charis' idea. It is we want to not only mind the gap, but bridge the gap a little bit, make atheists a little bit more maybe user-friendly. I don't know how I would put it, but
approachable, listenable.
Yeah, we've had some theists on, and they will come back several times because they actually enjoy the conversation. I recently had one on from which I thought hilarious, from Charis Bible College.
I want my lizard sex.
Yes.
Wait, what?
We're still waiting for that.
He promised me lizard sex and he did not deliver.
Yeah, and he promised pictures for the next one, so we'll have to wait. Because
Does this prove some relevant doctrine? I'm curious.
Yes.
It has to do with angels breeding with humans,
Oh,
The
yes,
Asylums,
that's
Nephilim.
Genesis.
No,
Right, Genesis
no,
6, whatever.
no. It was the Nephilim who bred with lizards, and that's where the dinosaurs
Oh.
came from.
Wait, what? No, what?
Nephilim were crossbreeds
I've
between.
not heard of this. Wait. There was a Christian saying this, or this was something you
Yes.
guys heard? No.
Oh no,
Yes.
this is the Christian saying this.
Okay. No, all right, I get it.
I wanted my lizard sticks.
I understand. So this would actually make, weirdly, I'm strange to say this, would make more sense of the Genesis 6 passage. So I don't know. So like in Genesis 6, it's just talking about the history, and then suddenly it just says, I can't remember if it says the Watchers or whatever come down and have sex with human women, and then they give birth to these giants, the Nephilim, and then there were giants, and then it moves on. Just moves on. It's like one line, and that's it. And so like, if you're reading it, you're like, what? Wait, hold on, stop. What? It's like someone's telling you about their day, and like, I went and did some chores, and I went and saw a movie, and then a robot destroyed New York, and then you're like, wait, what about the robot? So Genesis has this throwaway line, and then what happens later is that someone wrote this massive fan fiction off of that. It's like, well, let's explain what that means, and it's the Book of Enoch, right? So the Book of Enoch is this huge fan fiction, quote unquote, scripture that expands on that, explains that verse. And the Book of Enoch was treated as scripture by the first Christians. So it's actually a scripture that was foundational for the origins of Christianity. The first Christians regarded it as Holy Writ. So Enoch is actually a way more important book than Christians realize. But it's all about, demons, these invisible demons, and that get are the birth product. So the demons are unleashed on the world, and they're these invisible sky creatures that fly around and inhabit bodies and stuff. But to say that...
So an incubus. It's an incubus.
Yeah, well, an incubus is a variety of these demons. Yes, actually, I've written about the Talmudic fears of succubi in particular. There's a Talmudic passage, one of the greatest fears that's described among the rabbi.
BDSM angels.
Is, wait for it. So they actually say this. So they say, like, well, you got to be really worried if you're a man and you wake up and in the dark and there's a beautiful woman on top of you having sex with you. You have to stop that, because that's a succubus, and she's going to steal your semen and take your semen over to the enemy and put it in the wombs of the enemy's women.
I'm a fucking succubus.
And this is in the Talmud. This is for real. And your enemy's women will have children that will be your sons, and they will come and kill you on the battlefield. And this is like a deathly fear they had. So they're talking about like hypnopompic, erotic hallucinations, right, of a woman on top of you. This is also why women on top is forbidden, because it's actually a demonic position. Women shouldn't do that.
Fuck that.
And by other lore, I don't think it's in the Talmud, but there's other Jewish lore that Lilith, the original version of Eve, was turned into a demon and kicked out of Eden for wanting to be in a top position during sex. So Lilith was kicked out, and she became the queen of the demons. And then Eve was made, who was a right, good, subservient woman. Unfortunately, was so subservient and so gullible that she listened to the devil and ruined everything. But anyway, this is the way this mythology works. It's very bizarre. Anyway, I got on this huge distraction. But if we go back to Genesis 6, it actually makes more sense to say that the angels came down, had sex with, clearly you can't say human women, they had sex with lizard women, apparently, female lizards.
So for those who are a fan of
dinosaurs, so it's like, no, they couldn't have said that back then because they didn't know about dinosaurs back then. So it's kind of funny that Christians are trying to update their mythology, creating new fan fiction about lizard sex with angels creating dinosaurs. This is brilliant. I think it's a tribute to ancient scripture.
Maybe it's because
hybrids were giants.
Maybe it's because I'm Dutch, but what about the logistics of all of that? I mean,
that's what I was going to ask. If the hybrids are giants, how big are the angels? I mean, there is a such thing as too big.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. It's true.
Yeah.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate here. I'll write some fan fiction myself. So the angels come down and have spiritual sex with the lizards somehow. Like, angels can change their size, right? They're angels, they can do anything. So they can change their size, like Alice in Wonderland, have sex with the lizard. And the lizard gives birth to a tiny little dinosaur thing, which grows into a giant dinosaur. And then we have dinosaurs. So there, all the size problems solved. Easy peasy.
I'm still thinking
So-
about the
they're
human
having
the
spiritual
human women,
are they-
but
Yeah, right. The human woman problem is a problem for that verse. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sexual sex, though. I mean, or
Spiritual
sex.
sex.
Are they like all sapiosexuals?
Or well, not necessarily sapiosexuals. They it would be pneumosexuals. Because they're attracted by the possession of a pneuma, which would be a spirit. So they would even be attracted by non-intelligent people, apparently, because lizards.
But that still has ramifications. I mean, how would you fertilize a physical egg with spiritual sex? I mean, this requires.
Well, the Holy
physical-
Spirit did it, right? Holy Spirit impregnated Mary and put a little bit of semen in there somehow.
And she saw what happened with Elizabeth's husband. Like, he was struck dumb for not obeying, so
Blind.
she knew she had
Blind.
to obey. This was not willingly.
Yes, right. Yes, spiritual pneumatic rape was invented. That's true. There's no consent negotiation in the Mary's impregnation scene in the Bible, is there? Yeah.
She knows
Yeah,
she
like-
has to obey. I
Do
mean,
you, right.
you're-
Like, do you want to be impregnated with the Messiah's
does it
child?
matter?
No. They just do it, and they. Oh, by the way, we've impregnated you with the Christ child. Oh, thanks for letting me know.
it's funny, Charis, that you would say that consent doesn't matter, because in the side chat,
I did not say that.
Jared Bluto says I should give you your lizard sex, so we'll have to have a conversation after this stream how we're going to do that. But I'm pretty sure that will be the best visited stream we'll ever do on this channel.
Oh, now he's offering hentai lizard sex.
Now I wonder if Isabella Rossellini does a YouTube show of weird animal sex where she dresses up as the animal and shows how the sex occurs. She did lobsters, I think. So I wonder if she did. I wonder if she did a lizard episode. So you might be able to actually incorporate bits of that.
What kind of Nephilim would that create?
Dinosaurs, I thought we. Oh, lobsters. Jordan Peterson.
I think if we carry on, we might lose our backup stream, because I haven't mentioned it yet, but we're streaming live on two channels. We're streaming live on our own, and we're streaming live on SciStrike's channel.
We can wrap up.
And no, what I was going at is that SciStrike is easily freaked out with particular forms of sex. We already had him Google
Did you catch the My Little Pony?
furries and My Little Pony, and so he might not sleep for days after streaming this. So
Peter,
yes,
Peter, be careful. He is in the side chat. So just be careful.
I know.
Only if he goes and watches Isabella Rossellini's YouTube channel about the weird animal sex. That might result in him losing sleep for days.
Oh, now I do have to have a link to pitch to him.
Just Google it. Isabella Rossellini and what is it called? I can't remember what it's called. Something like green sex or something.
Green sex.
It's like she does scientifically accurate depictions of animal sex and discusses it, how it works, and she dresses up like the animal. And this is the actress. This is the daughter of Ingmar Bergman. The actual renowned actress.
What about duck sex? Because they have like 9-inch penises and it. Never mind.
Well, that would be Daryl Ray. So if you go Google Daryl Ray and duck sex, you'll probably find a whole with images, scary images, and everything of him talking about that. Yeah, the whole evolution of sex is a thing that Daryl Ray does. So yeah, that will freak people out too. So maybe don't go there. But...
Okay. Well. We seem to be fine with with the second stream. He says the stream will continue. I'm not sure what he meant there, but we won't go there.
Well, we've gone an hour. How much longer do you want to go? Let's
yeah.
How many of Sci's videos will I demonetize?
Yes.
I
Well,
demonetize all of his videos.
we usually go between an hour and an hour and a half, but we still have a question that I have to
Okay.
ask because
Cool.
I have spoken with the guy on Twitter several times, Reality Revolutions. Um,
Oh,
I
yeah.
had to ask you about Christos. So, can you tell us, for the
Yes,
people
yes.
who don't know, what Christos is?
Yeah, I'm developing an app. It's available already. There's a skeletal form of it you can go get for Android and for Apple mobile devices called Christos, Chrestus. And it has two things that are really cool. One is, and the goal is that ultimately it will contain every argument for and against the historicity of Jesus in an argument tree, so you can go find them. We've only got part of it built out now, but and it'll be organized better ultimately. Like we're going to do more work on it. We're going to keep updating it, so it'll get better and better and better. But a lot of that stuff's already in there now, like rebuttals to Bart Ehrman and specific Bible verses that people might cite at you. You can go in there and find it and say, well, this is what the evidence is. This is where you can go find more about it, and so on.
So it's like
it's
Kiala,
designed
but
for
more
that.
specific.
Yeah, it's totally on the historicity of Jesus.
Okay.
Now, the other side of it is the other piece of it is a Bayesian calculator, which is you just go in and just follow the instructions, and it'll say just guess your own estimate of odds. It's just odds, so it's really easy. People usually intuitively reason about odds better than probabilities. Probabilities are so artificial. Odds are more natural to the way our brain works. And you can go just estimate odds on things, and you could add pieces of evidence and estimate odds on them according to the instructions in there, and it will do all the math for you and say, well, based on these estimates you've given, this is the conclusion you should reach, based on just the logical formula of it. So you can do it with any argument, but it's in there for the historicity arguments. So let's put in all the evidence for and against historicity and see what odds we estimate on each one of those, and then see how the conclusion comes out. But you can do it for any other argument. You can relabel the things any way you want. So it's a really handy Bayesian calculator. I think it's pretty cool. So people who want either one of those features or both of them together, go check out the app. Don't complain about its price. It's I think $7 or somewhere around there. It is really expensive to produce, even as simple an app as that. Trust me, it's a lot of freaking hours of work and professional coder and everything. And it is super simple. It's like one of the simplest apps ever, but it's still it was still expensive to produce. So we're trying to recover costs on that. But it's really handy, and it's going to keep getting better and better. We're going to update it with better organization and more information month after month. So so check it out on Google Play or the Apple App Store for Christos, and you can get it and then get the updates as things come along, and use the Bayesian calculator however you want. Lots of ways you can use it. Use it against presuppositionalists and see what happens.
Okay. And so now's my question. Reality Revolutions, is he helping with developing of the app, or because?
Yeah, it's an organization in Canada actually who developed this. Their main objective was to develop this app, but they want to do other things too. The app was just one of many projects that they were aiming at. But yeah, tools that will be helpful for people to get a better access to reality and questioning alternate versions of reality. So that's kind of their mission, and this app is one of their first forays into that. But yeah, they funded the app, helped develop it, and obviously have an interest in promoting it, as do I. So I'd like to see it get wider press, and I want to keep working on it. So I'm doing a lot of the updates on the back end to improve it, and so I've got more scheduled this month, in fact. So I'll get some of those done. There should be a good update done before the end of this month, actually.
Excellent.
Okay, so I think we're at 2 hours and 15 minutes, so we might want to wrap it up. Charis, have a last question? Or Charis?
My mind just went blank. I'll probably think of it after the stream ends.
Yes.
Well, you're welcome to have me on if you've got like a specific topic you want to deal with, or have me on with someone else and have a discussion or anything like that. I'd be happy to be on again.
They'll be grateful. Or we'd be
Yeah.
grateful that we'll try to minimize your pain while you're on here.
Right
Well,
on.
as it stands, I'm in the process of setting up talks with Kent Hovind. Would you like to have a talk with him?
No, please put me on with someone else.
Hey, did you catch Aaron Raw's discussion with Eric Hovind?
I did not. I'm very intrigued by that. That's that can't have gone well for Hovind.
Aaron Raw was not planning on it being necessarily
Oh, was that the one where he got
nice discussion.
Right. Yeah, right. No, I did hear about it. Yeah, I didn't see it, but I did hear about it.
Well, the first go round, Eric couldn't show up because he was stuck in the woods somewhere. And then,
No, that was Kent.
was it Kent? Oh, it was
Yeah,
Kent, and then
that
Eric
was
filled
Kent.
in for him.
Oh, okay.
That's
Oh, I
Canadian,
see.
isn't it?
Right.
Yeah,
That's right.
and the worst thing ever to happen to Aaron Ra. That's where I was a part of. I was a moderator
Yes.
in his debate
That was
with
Mr. ID.
Mr.
Yeah.
ID. Um, so
Did you see
Yeah,
that one?
I won't even
I would
ask
find
you to talk to him because
So intolerable. Yeah, I wouldn't. I would find that insufferable, frankly. Yeah.
but
You're familiar with that then?
Unless he wanted to debate something that's more in my wheelhouse, like the role of Christianity in the development of modern science, or uh, Christian values in modern science, or moral theory, or things that are biblical history too.
Right.
Like creationism, like obviously I can handle my own on creationism, but it's so much bullshit that comes out of them. That I would just find that tedious.
It's
So-
not necessarily applicable to our lives on an everyday basis.
Well, also true.
but
Well,
we'll,
for most
Well, they
of
would
us,
they
I
would
mean,
disagree. They would disagree, of course.
Right,
They would say
right.
that the salvation of society depends upon getting biblical, and getting biblical depends upon agreeing that evolution is false. You know, it's a whole cascade of things.
we'll have a look out and see if we can find someone interesting enough to talk to you, because it should make for an interesting conversation, I think. And I
Well,
really
especially if we do another mirror on SciStrike, we should do something on like ancient science, because that's my dissertation topic. That's what I got my PhD in, history of science stuff. So ancient science, medieval science, the scientific revolution. These are things I can talk about, and the differences between pagan values and Christian values, and how they interacted in those spheres.
what you might find interesting is every night, I don't know how your nights are, but every night around 10 p.m. Central, or 10:30, or 11, Sci holds a movie night, and it has to do with flat Earth, and we go through different flat Earth or other kook people.
is
This is a thing that I have expertise in on the ancient background, because that was a debate in antiquity, flat Earth versus spherical Earth, and the scientists versus the Christians again, and also lay pagans, illiterate pagans. So yeah, I could talk about the ancient debate between flat earthers and how the spherical earthers argued against them, what scientific evidence they had. Even then, they had really good freaking evidence back then for the sphericity of the Earth. So there's a whole discussion there. Even.
okay.
That would be interesting. You should be
SciStrike.
aware that it's a drinking game, though.
Yes, watching the movies, I would expect.
SciStrike already responded in the chat. He'd be very happy to have you on the topic you just mentioned on ancient science,
Yeah,
because I think
so,
I think he
yeah.
would be very interested in doing something like that. So I'll.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure that Sci would keep everybody on topic, wouldn't he, Sci?
I'm
No,
pretty
that'd be
sure.
great. Just get in touch with me and we'll schedule something. It has to be months out because it takes me a while to schedule. But yeah, so get in touch with me as soon as you can. We'll work something out.
Okay,
That'd be
great.
fun.
Okay, so I
we
think
do get a little bit rowdy, so it might be similar to you hanging out in a pub, but worse.
I do that. That's like practically my job. I travel the country, hanging out in pubs with bunches of people and excited conversations. Yeah.
You could ride them.
Yeah.
Have some fun with us sometime. Just
Very
loosen
good,
up and
yes.
have some fun. Before
Okay.
you come to Missouri, then. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
you were gonna say?
yeah, I think we should wrap it up here. We will be happy to have you on a second time because this has been a very fun conversation. And as I said, I would really like to find someone that you could talk to and maybe have another different conversation. Maybe find a Christian that you can talk to and see how that
Yeah.
goes. You're going to have one pretty soon. I will watch
Yeah.
that. I'll be very curious because that's a person that I think we bumped into about the same time a couple of years ago, and that
That's right.
has been an
Yeah.
ongoing thing. So, and I really hope
Yeah. So it's
I really
a
hope
Christian apologist. I'll be debating moral theory with on Godless Cranium's show at some upcoming date. I can't remember exactly when, but September 1, somewhere around there, I think. But yeah, that's coming up. Keep your eye on Godless Cranium's feed. Then you'll see announcements when that finally comes to fruition. But you will see how that goes. Yeah.
that should be a fun talk. Okay, so we're wrapping up right here. I want to thank everyone who has been in the chat. We didn't have an awful lot of time to look at the chat because I had to be directing the stream as well as listen and then watch the chat a little bit. So it was a bit more than I expected, but I think it went fairly well. So thanks, Richard, for coming, and we'll hope to have you again sometime and come up with
Oh yeah.
with another good topic, and maybe we'll have
Well,
some information
before
about lizard sex that you haven't heard of before. So
yeah. Well, before I sign out, let me mention two things. Everybody who wants to know more about me, go to richardcarrier.info.info. You can find my Twitter feed there, my Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook. And Twitter and Facebook is where I announce things like this. So people want to see me talk about things. It gets announced there. I also have my blog there. You can find all my books for sale there. But also Google the Secular Academy. Go check out the Secular Academy. I've just announced, I think soon, if it hasn't come out yet, it will be in a day or two. All my classes. I do an online class every month on some topic in philosophy or ancient history. And several months ahead. So each month I do a different one. So come join my courses, and we go through readings, we do discussions, and so on. And you can pick my brain on any subject that's related to what we're talking about. So it's a great opportunity to really engage and get a lot of my time and attention on these things. Yeah, help support me making a living as an independent scholar. It's much better doing that than being shackled to some university. So
okay,
so I appreciate all the support.
I think I've pretty much all the links in the description already. richardcarrier.info,
Cool.
secularactivism.org. Then I
Yeah.
have a link to your books and your Twitter account. I will add in the Facebook account as well. I'll look it up and add the link to that one as well. So everyone can just
Cool.
go into the description and find all the relevant links there.
Awesome.
So thanks very much, Richard, for coming. It was an absolute pleasure, and yeah, for a small channel like us, it was a pretty big thing to have you here. So
well, yeah, definitely this is great. Definitely have me on again. I had a good time. So
okay,
Excellent.
we'll do. So we're gonna head off as usual with our tiny little outro, and thanks everyone for coming, and see you all next time. Bye bye.